Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the ConTinual's Comics Lair. Tonight, we're discussing the differences and the similarities of writing comic books and prose. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and the Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. And I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us briefly what their experiences are with writing comics and with writing prose. And Susan and Clay, will start with you.
Oh, okay. Hi. We are Clay and Susan Griffith. We tend to co-write under that name, although we have written separately as well. Probably most noted for prose at this point, we wrote the Vampire Empire series for Pyre Books, Crown and Key for Del Rey, thank you, and Flash and Arrow TV tie-in for Titan. Comics-wise, we have written Disney tie-in stuff. We've written some small press adventure humor for a company that used to be known as Blue Water and has changed its name multiple times now. And probably most noted in comics for writing The Tick for New England Comics and Tick-related spin-off titles like The Man-Eating Cow and Paul the Samurai. So that's where we are.
Okay. Alex?
Oh, okay. Hi there, I'm Alex Simmons. Comic book wise, I'm known for, oh my goodness, writing for DC, Scooby-Doo, also Batman. I created the character Orpheus and did a miniseries, Batman Orpheus Rising. I also wrote a 2-part Superman for them. I've also written for Archie Comics for a number of years and did several graphic novels for them and miniseries. I also wrote my own, or actually created and wrote my own character, Blackjack, which is a story about an African-American soldier forged in the 1930s in both graphic novel form and prose form. And I've done a number of independent comics and programs, projects rather, over the years. I've also written plays, children's books, and I most recently, as a matter of fact, this past March, I'd written a short story for the Black Panther Tales of Wakanda book, which came out through Marvel and Titan Books. And there's a number of other things, but that's pretty much my Sherlock Holmes play, which also I should mention because I like it and it was fun and it was produced.
Seanan?
Yes.
Would you like to tell us where you got, what your experience is in comics and in prose?
Oh, sure. I was just nodding at Mr. Simmons and suddenly you're calling on me. So I'm Seanan McGuire. My girlfriend is a bigger fan of Alexander Simmons than she is of me, being as she is a die-hard Archie fangirl. And would seriously dump me for anyone who has written for Archie ever. Work out well for me. I have been nominated for more Hugo Awards in a 10-year period than anyone else ever. I am primarily a novelist. I write under both my own name and the name Mira Grant. As Seanan McGuire, I write mostly urban fantasy, modern portal fantasy, and adult alchemical fiction. And then as Mira Grant, I write biomedical science fiction thrillers with a lot of dead stuff getting up and wandering around. For Marvel Comics, I spent 2 years writing the adventures of the Gwen Stacy of Earth 65, first in Spider-Gwen, Ghost Spider, and then first in Spider-Gwen, Ghost Spider, and then in just straight up Ghost Spider, because they really like handing out hyphens at Marvel. I've also done some X-Men tie-in work, and one day I'm going to eat Jonathan Hickman and take his job.
Dan?
My name is Dan Jolley. I started out writing comic books when I was 19. And by the time I was 25, I wrote some stuff that might have been considered good. My first ever published story was in the Aliens franchise for Dark Horse, and I went on from there to write for DC, Marvel, more Dark Horse, Image, Top Cow, Humanoids, Paris, pretty much the whole comics industry at one time or another in this country. Probably most notable in the comics field for co-creating the current version of the character Firestorm, which can be seen on Legends of Tomorrow and various video games now. I am kind of transitioned, not entirely, but transitioned into writing novels around 2007 and write mainstream middle grade books and graphic novels for HarperCollins and Lerner and write kind of gross, nasty superhero and murder mystery books for grown-ups through Falstaff Books.
Okay, and so when you started in one field and then made the transition to the other, how did that happen? How did that come about that this door opened for you? Did it open for you? Did you pursue opening it? Just if you would tell us your break-in story for whichever one of those media you didn't start in.
Who goes first?
I was just going to say quickly, I started out as a high school graduate who was pursuing acting. And so for several years, I was doing stage and some extra work in films and on television, extra work on television as well. And at the time, there seemed to be two camps of roles for Black men. There was either the sort of stereotypical stories about us being slaves or whatever on that end of the stick. And on the other end, we were the angry Black men. So it was rebellious sort of viewpoint. And I knew that there was a lot more going. So I started writing material for me to use as audition pieces, which eventually led to me doing more theater, which led to my writing a Sherlock Holmes play. And originally I was writing it to perform it. You know, I had a character in there that I wanted to perform. I found, and this may be true for a number of you, going from one field into the writing field, you suddenly realize, you know, you're not an actor who kind of writes. If you really care about the story, then you have to be the writer and you have to take on that responsibility and you have to serve the story. And so the more I worked on the play, the more I realized, you know, hang the acting thing, I got to get this right first. And I became more and more involved in playwriting. And so that was that step. And my fanboy mindset kept me running around the conventions, the comic convention and things. And so eventually, as I did more writing in the theater, people became aware of that. And eventually I got an opening into the comic book world, but I'll talk about that another time.
Okay.
So I started out as a novelist primarily, with a penchant for going on Twitter and begging Marvel to hire me to write the X-Men pretty much on a weekly basis, usually with terrible Disney song parodies. And eventually this led to an editor at the X office emailing me to go, "Will you stop if we hire you?" And I said, "Yes, of course, absolutely." And they hired me, and then I got made fun of by Bleeding Cool for being too enthusiastic about the idea of writing for the X-Men, which I don't understand. Comics don't pay. Like, you can make a living if you write enough comics fast enough, but nobody is looking at writing a monthly comic book and going, "I'm gonna be a millionaire." That's just not how it works. So why would you do it if you didn't love it? There is no reason not to be enthusiastic. You've got to actually be here because you want to be, because there's no door prize for showing up.
Yeah, that's very true. I probably went through the same thing a lot of comic writers did in my life. I grew up reading comics, so I loved them. And then I sort of played around with short stories when I was in high school and college. I quit reading comics, got back into them in college, and suddenly thought, you know, somebody writes these things. Somebody actually makes them. They don't bubble up from the ground. I mean, they're created. So I started cold calling Marvel mainly because I was a Marvel kid. You know, this was the 80s, so you sent stuff through the mail just to editors of the books. And I got nice rejections over and over, and occasional phone calls. "Hey, I liked your story. Try something else." Nothing happened. Saw an ad in an issue of The Tick. New England Comics was looking for artists and writers, so I sent them a pitch for my character. And about a year later, they called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, we like your stuff. We don't want to do your character, but would you do ours?" And I said, yes. So that's how that was my first real published work, was working with The Tick. And then we did other stuff after that. That was when I was still solo, of course. But
and I only got in because, I mean, I was a big comic book fan, don't get me wrong. I read all of them, again, in the 80s and stuff. But I was mainly focusing on my prose until someone called and said that they had just agreed to write these Disney comic books, but and was really excited, but he had never watched a Disney movie. He had just accepted the job. And so I said, I will take, he says, could you help me? I said, yes, because I was a Disney fanatic. And I won't say who that person was.
It might have been me.
It might have been you. But that's how I sort of got in. And we were doing Disney stories for, Acclaim. And loved it, and just loved the contrast between writing prose and writing comics, which we'll get into later. But that was the main draw for me, and getting a chance to work with Clay for the first time. So that was probably the big start for us.
Well, comic books led directly into my prose career. I was at at MegaCon in Florida in, I don't remember what year it was a long time ago. And a fellow named Scott Siensen, who wrote a boatload of licensed property novels, had read some of my comic stuff and came up and was talking to me and mentioned that he had just gotten a gig writing a Star Trek tie-in novel. Wanted to know if I wanted to partner with him on that because his schedule was pretty full. And so that gave me my first taste of prose, because I've been writing comics for 10 years at that point, I guess. And then the next time it happened was at Tokyo Pop. I was writing a bunch of comics for Tokyo Pop, and they had plans to do their own prose line. So I had pitched a project, and they could not decide on an artist that they liked for it. And I said, maybe I could just do it as prose. And they said, oh yeah, maybe you could. And then all of a sudden I was a YA author. Now they did not bother to tell anyone that they were doing a prose line. And so it came and went really fast, but that was the first original novel that I had done. It was in 2007. And I haven't really looked back since then.
Well, all of you have experience in planning a comic story and planning a prose story. How do the processes differ, and how are they the same when you're just laying out the story in your head before you actually start writing the actual words of it?
So the process of assembling a narrative is the same whether you're talking about a multi-generational epic or a haiku. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you know the things that you are going to hit along that way. Now, how many things you can fit in there is somewhat defined by the span of the project, by how much space you're going to have. When I'm trying to explain writing a comic script to novelists who have never tinkered in that arena before, I tell them it's a structured poem. A standard comic strip is standard comic book is a form of structured poetry. It's a 20-page structured poem. You can have up to a certain number of panels per page, up to a certain number of words per panel, and you have to start thinking of it on that granular syllable by syllable level. You can probably tell from listening to me for less than 5 seconds that I'm an extremely verbose person. I'm full of words and I want to share them with everyone. I write 7 books a year, but I also write a lot of poetry. And so when you're breaking down a comic script, a comic story, you really do want to just look at it on that syllable by syllable basis. How many beats can I have? How many panels can I have? And remember that since comic scripts are essentially visual in a way that novels are not necessarily, that you also get to play with the blank spaces. The pauses and the tacits are a part of your narrative in a way that they aren't in books, but are in any kind of visual format, in playwriting, in television, anything where you can play with space. Also, if you're working in modern Cape comics, if you're working with Marvel, you're working with DC, you're going to have an editor looking at every single one of those syllables. I've had editors spike interrobangs because they thought it was too clear that my string of nonsense syllables represented a specific curse word. And that level of granularity, no novel editor has time to go on page 253, paragraph 4. There's a sentence that implies a word we don't think your age group should see. If the word's not there, they move on.
Now you mentioned a tacit. What is a tacit?
in musical theater, a tacit is generally when you slow down the beat and you take it from being, you know, dun 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 dun. So you have those pauses that are built into the structure of the musical number. And you can also build those into any visual medium. It's not a stop, it's a pause.
I think that's a lot more common too in more modern comics. Comics are, I think, have become much more cinematic in the way they think about themselves. If you compare a comic written, say, in the last 20 years versus one written in the 60s or even the 50s, older comics are much more, each panel was sort of a moment, and it was connected to the next panel, but it could be only tangentially connected. It could be the next day. More comics today the stories tend often to be slower because they do put in more of those pauses. They put in more of those cinematic beats. They try to recreate a cinematic experience of, you know, they may have a page of just two people sitting in a diner staring at each other because they're trying to create that drama of silence that you would get in a movie. That can work really well. Sometimes I think it ends up wasting space because you do only have often 24 pages and only so many panels per page. I think there might be better ways, since it is visual, to tell a story in a tighter fashion. But I'm also older, so I'm used to comics that were written in the 60s that are more of the Jack Kirby style, where there's a lot of stuff in your face constantly and not as much of the slowness. But the 80s, I think comics became much more cinematic and wanted to be more like movies and less like their own sort of thing. I'm not quite sure that's exactly what I mean.
I would agree with you, and I think that, I think you used the word earlier, Sean. Shonen, is that how it's pronounced?
Yes.
Yeah, Shonen. You said something about haiku, and in a way, when I teach comic writing and creating, I often say that it's like you can see the movie in your head, but then you have to decide what are the most important snapshots to take from that moment. And as comics went from I'd say the early 70s forward, the writing teams and the writers and creators changed dramatically. The approach changed dramatically. We were going through a social awareness time period. Consciousness was changing. People wanted more of this, deeper that, more subtextual material. And so, you get a Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams Green Arrow, Green Lantern opus, as opposed to what you would have a few years before. So I think it was a matter of trying to put more story into the comics and make the comics more relevant, as opposed to just pure entertainment. That was part of that change. And then, yes, visually, once you started going into the computer coloring and everything getting very more graphic, not graphic ugly or bloody or gory, but more graphic design, more bright and shiny and polished looking, then it became more the cinematic opus. And so I'd say society's changing affected the comic books tremendously, which affected prices and all that other sort of thing. And now we have, depending on whose comic you're following, and we've been talking about DC and Marvel, but and I guess you could put Image in there as well, but if you look at the independents and you look at manga, there's plenty of variation in terms of the visual and the storytelling that's going on. So I think there's a wider range of possibilities now, and a wider banquet of material now than there had been in the past.
And see, I would say that we lost a lot of pauses coming out of the 80s into the 90s and early 2000s. I grew up on comics in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. Obviously, those were my formative years for the comic book intake. We used to have baseball games. We used to have sleepovers. Mm-hmm. Allowed to have dead space, for lack of a better way to describe it, where there wasn't superhero action going on. It was the X-Men go to the mall and pick up a teenager.
It was the character moments.
Exactly. And we have lost so many of the character moments because you have to get to the superhero action now.
I don't consider that dead space, as Susan said. I think those are character building moments. I agree we've lost them. I think modern comics don't waste their time on that stuff anymore, but those were the beautiful moments. Yeah, the X-Men playing baseball.
Agreed. That is why I fell in love with the X-Men, was because they felt like people who would let me hang out with them and eat their popcorn.
Yep.
But that has really gotten stripped out of modern comics because they are these lean, mean, 20-page advertisement delivering machines. And I love them. Matt Fraction told me never to work for Marvel because I would love them less. And I'm like, nope, I'm moving into the sausage machine. What else can I shove in there? But we did have that contraction period where, as it became more cinematic, they started stripping out the stuff that didn't make for an interesting shot.
Totally agree.
Dan, did you want to add anything?
Well, to get back to the sort of nuts and bolts of it, I agree with what Seanan said. The concept part for a novel or a comic book story is the same for me. One of the key books that I ever read that really affected my writing was The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. And the 12-step process that he outlines in there, I use to this day. I use for everything. But for a novel, it's like I use that 12-step process and then break that out into roughly like a paragraph or two per chapter, and then I start writing. For a comic book, it's so much more precise. The limitations are so much more rigid. And sort of just by trial and error, I came up with a process that I always use to make sure that everything fits. I don't get to the end of the comic and, I need 3 more pages. On my website, which is danjolley.com, there's a document you can download called How to Write the Way I Write. Not saying it's the perfect way or the way that you should do it. It's just the way I do it. And that outlines my entire process for writing a comic book script. I have like this chart that I make. There's some math involved. It's really easy math because I can barely do math. But it's free. Anybody interested can download it.
Yeah, I'm not what you would call, I guess, a muses sort of man when it comes to comics every time. But usually the story comes to me first. It's whatever it is I'm going to try and say with this story. And that goes from my own property, Blackjack, to Batman, to Archie, to Scooby-Doo. My people even said to me, how can you write Tarzan? Because I wrote Tarzan for a while, the comic strips. And I said, usually with a pen and paper. Because, bottom line, it's who are the characters? What am I trying to say with this particular story? And then it sort of blooms out from there. And then in terms of the construct, whether it's a comic book or a novel or a short story or a play, my mind just shifts into that structure. And you're right, comics and film, because I also do screenplays, comics and film is a very visual medium. It's visual with a few words. Well, some comics have a lot of words, but it's visual with a few words. So it's can you tell the story visually? How much can you tell visually? How cinematic or how graphic or how impactful do you want those visuals to be? And what are the complements of the words? And then really, what is the story about? And what are those moments? So some of the quiet moments you talked about, or the character development moments, are important in any story. And I think that, again, it's just a matter of finding a way of pacing it so that you can, or at least I try, to have those moments in there where they're necessary. And you were talking about the X-Men. I would say one of my favorite memories of the old X-Men comics was Kurt, or Nightcrawler. In the early days, his struggle with looking the way he does and being religious, being, you know, a card-carrying Christian, you know, or Catholic, I forget exactly, but, you know, the whole question about how could God create me to look like this, and how can I feel what I feel? Those are great moments, and people could identify with those moments from some other aspect of their life. You know, I'm from another country or another race, or maybe I have, you know, I've been persecuted because of my religion, or maybe I just have doubts about myself, and I can connect with that character's plight. I think those are important moments in those stories. And yeah, the visuals are exciting now with, you know, Cyclops' beams and all that kind of stuff. But I think the heart of a lot of the great comics that are coming out still are in those character moments, and that storytelling power that you can still get into the medium.
No, I agree. I mean,
That's an interesting point. We're all fans to some extent, as well as y'all being creators in the field. Is there a moment that stands out for you with a character where you said, that really nails this character?
Superman and Batman standing in a cornfield in Kansas, and Superman saying, you know, this is what I fight for. Also, another Superman story, it was a one-shot, as a matter of fact, and I cannot remember the title of it right now. Oh, I think it was What's Wrong with Truth, Justice, and the American Way, or something close to that. And he goes up against these super heroes who take lives. They kill the villains to get rid of them, and people are starting to cheer them on, because they say, hey, yeah, no, that's right. We don't have to worry about the Joker constantly coming back. We don't have to worry, because these guys are going to wipe them out. And that's what the hero should have been doing all along. And Superman trying to stand his moral and ethical ground through not only these characters confronting him, but the population starting to cheer for them. And how that story eventually is resolved, I thought was some great storytelling. And then those two moments stand out to me. Two different stories, but they both stand out for me as very powerful moments.
Emma Frost at the beginning of E is for Extinction, watching Scott and Logan beat the living crap out of each other on the lawn, just turning to Hank and saying, looks, powers, and the best body money can buy, and I still rank below a corpse. You know, as a female fan of the X-Men, I have always been bothered by the fact that Jean Grey's personality is the girl. And many of the people who have written the X-Men can't really move her beyond that. So they bring all of the other female characters down to let her be the most impressive girl.
Mm.
So Emma was really speaking for generations of X characters in that moment. It's beautifully done. Absolutely spectacular. Ooh,
Pardon me, the hounds are loose. Yes.
That's okay. That's all right.
And at the very beginning of Age of Apocalypse, when Clarice Ferguson shows back up after having disappeared in her first arc of Generation X, she didn't even make it out of the introductory episodes. You have just a portal open and a word balloon that says, make way, grievously injured mutant cheesecake coming through. And that established the entire character beautifully from that moment. Blink became a fan favorite first panel she showed up. You know, this failed character that they had brought in to kill off was never intended to stick around. We're never getting rid of her now.
In the 1980s, Roger Stern wrote Doctor Strange. And Stern is one of the great comic book writers of all time. And Doctor Strange, although I always loved him, was a big stiff throughout most of his time. There was no real character to him. It was just a weird world. And so it was cool. But there was an issue where his live-in longtime girlfriend / hostage, Clea, leaves him to go back to the dark dimension to do her own business. And he breaks down. He's wearing a suit too. He's not wearing his Doctor Strange gear. He's wearing just a suit. And he breaks down on the stairs of his sanctum and is crying because she's left. And it's like the first real human moment that I remember Doctor Strange having. And it was really effective. Later he goes and helps Clea fight this rebellion. And there's a great moment where he comes in at the end to confront Umar, And Clea says, no, this is my fight. You go handle the cannon fodder. I'm fighting Umar because I'm taking over. And she does it. Stern's just brilliant. Everything Roger Stern wrote was gold.
You just reminded me, I'm sorry if I'm cutting anybody off. You just reminded me of another moment. And again, I cannot tell you who the writer was with this, but I do comic history too when I do appearances at schools and things. And I talk about, representation in comics in terms of race or culture. And in the comic history I was doing, I talked about, even though China was America's ally during World War II, the depiction of Chop Chop and the Blackhawks was, bucktooth, the costume, and two hatchets. Everybody else has the cool blue costumes with the 44s or 45s, right? And they fly the jets, and Chop Chop's running around. And so he was like that. Physically they changed him over the years, but he was pretty much still the houseboy hero until sometime, I think it was in the 90s, where there's an issue where Chop Chop has decided, I am Chinese, my country's in trouble, and I need to go help them. And there's a confrontation, moderate, but still a confrontation he has with the Blackhawks about how, you guys have never really treated me as an equal. I've never had the uniform, I've never this is never, and it's like the Blackhawks are going, yeah, but we've always thought of you, and then they start to real, dag, he's right. We've always kind of thought of him as a part of us, but we've never really treated him as an equal. And so the just as you're thinking, okay, cool, now he's going to be, he gets the uniform, but he also gets in a jet and takes off to go back to China to fight for his people in that particular confrontation. And that's kind of where that story ended. And I thought, wow, it only took 35 years, but that was a pretty important moment. And like I said, I can't remember who wrote it, but yeah, there are these moments that, again, I think come about because of not only the era that they happen in, but because of the writers and where these writers are coming from at the time these stories come forth, or they bring these stories out. And so if you look at comics beyond, just a couple of years here and there, or 10 years here and there, you see a wide range of statements about where society has been since the 1930s.
Yeah. Dan, did you want to add something?
No, I couldn't. I pass. You guys have all given better answers than I could come up.
Don't go there, man. Don't go there.
Well, I'm going to put in a plug for the comic book group since we're all sitting here. The very first Legion of Superheroes story I read was The Stolen Superpowers, and it was originally appeared in early 300s issues of Adventure Comics. And Saturn Girl cheated to win the election as leader of the Legion, and then made excuses to kick all the other Legionnaires out or put them on probation. And I'm this little kid reading this story, and I'm thinking, this girl is awful. I hate this girl, because we were seeing her through the eyes of the other Legionnaires. And I believe Jerry Siegel may have written that story. And so then there's an invader coming into the system, and she tells everybody, you're all suspended, stay here, I'm going to take care of this. And off she goes. And a few minutes later, Lightning Lad comes out of the clubhouse, and off he goes. And so we find out there's this moment out in space when he overtakes her, that she had been warned by the Nautorians, who are seers, that this invasion was coming, Zaryan the Conqueror, and that one member of the Legion would die fighting Zaryan the Conqueror. And she intended to be the one. And it was like, oh, wow, this girl is great. This girl is awesome. And then, of course, Lightning Lad wanted to be the one, and my little kid heart fell in love with the two of them. But to me, that encapsulated Saturn Girl, that she will do what must be done and put the group ahead of herself. And so, since she is my favorite comic book character, I thought I'd take that moment to plug her.
And now I know where the scene from Endgame came from with Hawkeye and Natasha.
Well, maybe.
It's a very similar scene.
Yep. Anybody want to add anything to that before we move on?
Well, not to tread on Superman's toes here, since Alex already talked a lot about Superman, but and this is going to be a terrible example because I don't remember who wrote it either.
Oh, good. I'm not the only one, right? Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was Frank Whiteley who was the artist, but it was like a 4 or 5 page scene of Superman talking a girl down off a ledge.
Oh yeah.
She was up there and was gonna jump off and kill herself, and he shows up and just talks to her, you know. And like, so often it's the problem with this guy who is like a god. He's so powerful. What problem is there that he can't solve? Well, he might not have solved that one if he hadn't been that compassionate, and, you know, just demonstrating that he was that compassionate. His heart was that big, and he was that understanding of somebody else's situation, and he succeeded in talking her down. And it was beautiful, and it makes me a little emotional just talking about it.
That's cool. I remember that scene. It is a good one. It is a good one.
Superman is great for delivering emotion. There's an issue where he sits down and talks to Billy Baxton and finds out what the wizard Shazam did to Billy.
Yeah, who did this to you?
Yeah, who did that? Like, the real summation of who Superman is just that look on his face while he's saying, who did this to you? And then goes and reads the wizard Shazam for trash, which is something that is needed to happen for a very... Thomas, buddy, could you not perforate mommy? Thank you.
You have your priorities and he has his, obviously.
He said, look, I got dressed up for this appearance. Yo, you know, show me off some more, okay?
He has an anxiety disorder, so he has to be shaved and wears human clothes to keep him from licking too much of himself.
Okay.
Well, there's one thing that seems to me at least is materially different in putting together a comic story and a prose story, and that's art notes. So at what point in the process do you do those? Do you do those as you go? Do you come back and do them when you finish? Do you do them first? And how much detail do you go into on a given story? Susan, you want to start us off?
Yeah, the art notes are I usually choose the art notes that are going to define the scene in terms of what my story has to be. I won't tell them that, you know, unless there's a clock that has to just show 9 o'clock for the story purposes, I'm not going to go into that detail. That is something that the artist can have free will on, and I want them to, because they can always enhance a story. But if it's telling something that's important to get your point across, whether you need to have a lamp on in this panel because you're going to knock it off in the next panel, or there's going to be you know, any of those things. Like we used to do comedy, you know, with The Tick and Man-Eating Cow and Paul the Samurai, and leading up to those jokes, you had to have you know, certain things set up in order to deliver those jokes. And it's very easy for that joke to fail in comics, in art, than in prose. And you've really got to be an excellent time when you really got to be precise to the artist what I need in order to make that comedy moment happen. And so I try and choose those moments to be only particular to what I need to get the story across to the reader and to have the impact that it needs to have, whether it needs to be a shaft of light coming through and it needs to make somebody glow from behind because it's, you know, it's an important moment. Those are the details that I'll leave in, and then I'll usually, you know, say, you know, and, you know, you can put in whatever else you need elsewhere, because I want them to enhance it, because to me, it's a storyboard, and though I'm not an artist, I can only do stick figure storyboards. But those moments still need to be there, and I want those artists to fill that in.
And you specify the things that are truly important. You know, I did an X-Men annual that was a fill-in backstory. So it was explicitly set within a very, very narrow frame of time in a 1980s issue. The most art notes I think I've ever given were on that script, because Kitty Pryde had to be wearing her Star of David and her hair had to be curly. And there is a stronger and stronger tendency to draw her with very straight hair and no outward recognizably Jewish indicators. But that's not Kitty. And that's definitely not Kitty when you're still in the Sprite era. And I was writing her before she was Shadowcat. So, I was going back to my artist going, no, you need to make Kitty's hair curlier. It's actually vital to the character. No, she would have her Star of David outside her shirt. She's not hiding her identity around the other X-Men. And at that point, it does matter. And sometimes you can put terrible jokes that no one will ever get in the art notes, which is fun. For issue 4 of Spider-Gwen, we went to see Felicia Hardy on Spider-Man Noir's Earth, which is not a place that we spend a huge amount of time. And on his Earth, Felicia Hardy does not have superpowers, but she runs essentially a 1920s cat cafe. Just cats everywhere. So I contacted everyone involved with the comic, our colorist, our letterer, my artist, everybody, and asked if they had a picture of a cat that they had lost recently. And we filled Felicia Hardy's apartment with our dead cats. And maybe no one will ever get that but us, but I know that they're there. We gave them a soft place to rest, and they are now canonically a part of the Marvel Universe forever. They just get to stay there. No one's gonna hurt the cats.
It's sometimes, especially when you're doing mainstream comics, like many times I would get hired to write a script, write the script, turn it in. 3 or 4 months later, they decide who the artist is going to be. And I don't have any contact with them at all. And so, yeah, exactly. You put in everything that has to be there. And I try not to put in anything that doesn't in the panel descriptions. And other writers do it differently. Alan Moore is famous for being very verbose in his scripts. If he was writing a scene in a library, he'll describe every item of clothing the person is wearing and how they're wearing it, and then put in the titles of all the books that you can see. And I've talked to artists who, upon seeing a script like that, their response is, you know what, draw it yourself. Because they want to be able to contribute. But I always like it better if, like you were just talking about, Sean, and contacting the rest of the creative team. If I know who the artist is going to be, I'll get on the phone with him or her or them and figure out what they like to draw, what they don't like to draw. If somebody absolutely hates drawing cars, I'm going to try real hard not to put a scene in a used car lot.
It is a collaboration. A lot of people don't realize that when they get into the business, that you're a full team, and everything makes a difference, from the inker to the writing to the drawing to the to everything. So you want to sort of always keep that in the back of your mind. And
another thing too, I think, in terms of your question, Nancy, how does one think about this? I think artists who are writing stories think about it maybe a little differently than writers who don't draw or who dabble. And I know that I think maybe it has something to do with my performing life or whatever, and sometimes working in film, that I see scenes sometimes visually and have to hold back when I go to do some descriptive aspect of a comic book script, and remind myself, just like Dan was saying and others have said, you only need to mention what's necessary. Literally, what is key to that moment, especially if it's a mystery. Okay, certain clues have to be in certain places so that the detective will find it, or Batman will find it, or whatever. But other than that, no, it's not necessary. And so I will sometimes see a scene and see the characters in that scene and get maybe some of the dialogue going in my head and all that. And then it's like, again, pare it down to only the essential moments and beats for each panel, or for a full page spread or whatever, and then pace it out that way. But it's, again, taking the snapshot from the movie. It's, again, just seeing the whole thing and then going, click, that's what I need, click, that's what I need, and then only, again, write what's necessary to move the story along, and leave plenty of room for the artist to have a great time, because then it's fun for everybody. At least you certainly hope it'll be.
I did there was a double page spread in an Aliens comic that I did way back in the early 90s. But the space station that a lot of the action took place on explodes. That's like the second to last thing that happens. And the panel description for it says double page spread, the station explodes, go crazy, make it beautiful.
Yeah, Dan, you and I have actually worked in the same franchise because you did Colonial Marines, and
Yeah.
I've written the only alien YA novel.
Wow. I was not even aware there was an alien YA novel. I'm so sorry.
It's called, oh no, it's wonderful. I loved it. And I made the
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know.
for recommended reading. But yeah, no, it's teenagers and xenomorphs and lesbians. It's a whole mess.
No, that sounds fantastic. I'm just embarrassed I didn't know it was there.
It's all right. We didn't get a huge amount of push. I got orphaned.
Oh,
Oh.
are there copies available still?
Oh yeah, it's called Alien Echo. It's under my Mira Grant byline. You can absolutely acquire a copy. I really enjoyed it. Alien is the first movie I remember seeing. I was 3.
Oh, jeez, what a movie to see at 3. Okay.
Yeah, nope. I have a very vivid memory of sitting on my uncle's knee and watching as a man in a funny suit walked through a big room full of weird leather eggs. And then one of the eggs opened and then it gave him a hug. And then my mother came in the room and started screaming bloody murder.
Oh, so you didn't get to see the alien exit the doctor's abdominal region later?
That wasn't until I was 5.
Ah, okay. Yeah, well, that's a
Much more mature and
appropriate.
ready.
Yeah, much more appropriate at that age. Yeah.
Aliens has made you the person you are today.
Well, when it comes to writing projects, do you find that one medium is easier for you than the other, or are they just different?
Different.
Comics are much easier for me.
Dude.
They're different, but comics just so much easier than writing prose, just for me.
Why is
Well, I don't know. Maybe because comics force me to think more about plot and what I'm going to write. Because of the way you have to write a script, it forces me to be more disciplined in constructing the story. Prose, I'm kind of all over the place because you figure, well, I'll come back and fix that later. I'll move this over here. No, I'll scratch that out. And you end up with a mess. But comics make you do the work either ahead of time or in the moment.
It's a lesson in editing to me. I mean, I'm a prose person and I will always be a prose person, but I love the editing process that comics forces you into because it makes, it clarifies. It makes everything into a crystal clear format for me. But I'm a verbose person, just like Sean. I mean, it's what I do. So I want it all there, and then I'll take that editing and go down. But that's why Clay and I work together, because we're both opposites in every way.
See, I see it as different because there's short stories, and you've got to be more precise and economical, and focused, and like I said, sort of like haiku. And there's even what I think it's Hemingway, who wrote the 6-word story. And the moment I learned that and read it, I went, okay, now I got to start trying to do that. And so I started doing that, and it's fun. And so there's microfiction and short fiction. So to me, it's just like, okay, who am I this time? Am I the comic book writer, or the screenplay writer, or the stage play writer, or the novelist? And what's the challenge? And what's the story about? What are the characters about? And then just getting into it. I think comics, if you're writing a 240-page graphic novel, is going to drive you as bonkers as writing a 188-page YA novel. I think it's a lot of work, and the challenge is in telling a good story. So that's sort of the way I approach it. And I think probably the only thing that makes comics more difficult is the artist. Sometimes you have, because you're collaborating with somebody, sometimes you have grand collaborations and they're wonderful, and other times it's interesting.
Less so,
yeah. Sometimes.
The thing about comics that makes it easier for me to write is also the reason why I like writing novels better, even though it's harder. Because in comics, if I'm writing a scene that's set on the deck of a battleship, I can say, establishing shot, deck of a battleship. Captain America parachutes in or whatever. And that just kind of plops that out into the artist's lap at that point. You know, here, artist, go and do some research and, you know, get reference for a battleship and you know.
Have a good time.
Have a good time with it, yeah. Whereas if I'm writing a novel and there's a scene on a battleship, then I'm going to go and do, you know, 15 straight hours of research so that I know what I'm talking about with the battleship. I get the terminology right. I don't have stuff happening that can't possibly happen, because inevitably, if you just kind of half derriere it, people come in and who know what happens on the battleship and how they're set up, and they're like, no, this is wrong. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And I hate when that happens. I don't ever want that to happen in anything I write.
I have a quick question for you. Do you do the research before or after the writing?
Sometimes during.
Okay.
It really depends on how intensive the research needs to be. If I'm doing a tie-in property, like when I did Alien, it doesn't matter how familiar I think I am. I rewatch as much as I can. I reread as much as I can. I try to immerse into the IP. If I'm writing a science fiction story, I'll do 2 to 4 years of research before I start. You know, I wrote a trilogy about genetically engineered tapeworms. Well, I went to the Parasitology Museum of Minnesota and got a tapeworm in pill form and had a tapeworm for 2 years so I could accurately describe what it was like to have a tapeworm. His name was Timmy, and I miss him. But I also...
You mean when the writing was over, you just got rid of him?
Well, it turns out that my doctor was not willing to let me keep my tapeworm for more than about 2 years.
I see. Okay. It's like that. Okay.
It is like that. He was not a pet for always. He was a pet for now. Like a carnival goldfish that you keep in your digestive tract.
Man, I thought I was showing good dedication when I went and started taking martial arts classes to figure out how to write better fight scenes. And here you are with Timmy. Hats off.
Timmy the tapeworm. Timmy
the tapeworm.
You're not a writer.
But, you know, I also am on Wikipedia and Googling things and digging out my research books while I'm writing. And sometimes I have to be told, you know, it doesn't matter right now.
Yeah.
Just put in the word elephant and come back to it.
Yes. Describe the pachyderm later. Yeah, I'm like that, especially with one of my properties takes place in the 30s. And contrary to popular belief, I was not alive then. So I will write the adventure, action, references for locales and things like that. If I'm just burning to get that basic sloppy copy out, and then I go back and I start moving through it. And sometimes it rewrites 3-4 times to get it to a place where, okay, now it's genuine and all the cool stuff is in there. Yeah. But sometimes I know people will sometimes stop themselves from writing because they have to do a lot of research, or they feel they need to do research. I said, no, get the story out and then clean it up. Yeah, and certainly, you know, either way works depending on the writer.
Well, I had a scene in a novel that took place in a missile silo. And I realized getting up toward that scene that I didn't know anything about how missile silos were laid out. So I had to stop and go and look up, get some schematics for missile silos so I could even begin to get the sloppy copy out.
Anybody want to add anything to that?
I'm never going to do the tapeworm thing.
Aww.
You got me on that one. Wow.
Yeah.
You raised the whole new bar.
Yeah, really? This is no way.
I wouldn't even adopt a puppy for research, much less.
Well, on that, let's switch hats a minute. And please combine your fan hat with your writer hat. Who is your favorite superhero or other comics character? And if you had free reign, if the company said, develop a series for this character, do whatever you want, do you know what you would do?
So if you see, if you look up from where I'm sitting right now, and this is my work desk, I'm here 8 hours a day, there is a framed poster above my desk that is the first ever appearance of Emma Frost. It was released to comic book stores 6 months prior to her first appearance in the X-Men comics. And Emma watches me work all day long and judges me when I stop. So Emma is definitely my favorite comic character of all time, which is a position I have defended endlessly and don't really need to defend again. If Marvel said to me right now, today, we are giving you Emma Frost, absolutely guaranteed we will not take her away from you for 24 issues. You get 2 years. And at the end of that time, if you have not done something awesome, we're taking her back and we're never hiring you again, I would take it in a heartbeat. The guarantee of no cancellation would be the best thing ever. And I kind of know what I would do. I'm not completely certain because Jonathan Hickman has rewritten the X-Men status quo so extremely that I don't think it's going to stay rewritten the way it is. I don't think the Krakoa thing is going to last forever because Marvel has very strong narrative inertia. But until I know the shape of the land, I can't fully plot out. But if they said you can have your pick, take any character, I wouldn't actually take Emma for all that she's my favorite. I want Gwen back. I had Gwen Stacy for 2 years. The pandemic killed the Spider-Gwen comic that I was writing for Marvel. You know, we were doing okay. Our sales were reasonably stable. And then everything shut down. Diamond wasn't distributing for a little while. We had to go all virtual and we just got flattened. And I wasn't done. I had plot lines in and approved. I had arcs I was working on with her. I had ground I had lain. So I would probably give a kidney.
With or without the tapeworm?
It doesn't have to be mine. Like, I got scalpels. We're fine.
Okay.
But I would probably give a kidney for another couple guaranteed runs on my girl. I wasn't done with her. I want her back.
Okay.
I would, you know, when I was a kid, my hero was Spider-Man, and now that I'm grown up, my hero is Superman. But if Marvel called and said, you know, pick a card and write a book, I'd be damned, but I think I would have to write Son of Satan. And he would have to be Son of Satan. He wouldn't be Hellstorm. He would be back to wearing a red cape, shirtless with a pentagram. And oh man, I'd hate not to do Superman. Not that Marvel owns him, of course, yet. But God, I think I'd have to take Son of Satan and see if they would actually market a book called Son of Satan now. They did it in the 70s.
Yeah, but I find it funny that you said first, I'd be damned, and then you want
I may be.
Yeah, I'm just some symbolism in there.
He's my guy. He's my guy.
Yeah.
I'm partial to some of the older stuff that I love X-Men, and if they give me like any opportunity, I would take X-Men and run, because they're, especially if I could do it back in the period that I like with the original, not the original crew, but the original 80s crew. But I love some of the old classic comics that I read way back when, like from Gold Key, like Turok, Son of Stone. I would love to take those and update them and bring them, you know, back to some people's attentions. I would love to take some old pulp comics and make them, you know, flip them on their ear and bring back, you know, make them more female oriented and rewrite some of those, like The Shadow or.
Hey, no, Shadow. You can have the other ones. You can have any of the other ones. Doc Savage, any of that stuff. No. Okay, you know what? Maybe we could, you know, we'll talk about it later.
Oh, contact me.
She grew up next to the guy that invented the Shadow.
Yeah,
Max. Okay.
He used to always like pass me some of his books in the post office, and I was a Shadow fan from the get-go and had no idea at that time that.
We'll talk. The hounds. I'm curious what Dan's going to say.
You know, I try not to think about this question because there is not ever going to be you're guaranteed a character for this long and no cancellation and you can do whatever you want. I mean, unless you have some serious leverage over something or someone.
It's not in our futures, but people get it. Hickman got it. Morrison got it at one point. Just be really cool, and maybe someday you'll get it too.
Oh, that's not going to happen.
Flip you those photographs that. Well, never mind. We'll talk about that later.
So back around like 1999, the character Hawkman at DC was in serious flux. He had I don't know, 6, 7 different origin stories, and they all conflicted, and no one knew what to do with him. And I was very full of myself. I had like 2 things published at that point, and more than that. Anyway, a friend of mine and I came up with a plan to fix Hawkman, and I had made some contacts at DC. I think I might have published 1 or 2 things through them at that point. And we wrote up a pitch, and I printed it out and went to Wizard World Chicago and sought out Mike Carlin, who's one of the really big guys at DC.
Yeah, okay.
And walked up and said, "Hey, Mike, how's it going?" He said, "Oh, Dan, hey, how you doing? How you liking the show?" And I said, "It's great. How would you like to hear a pitch about Hawkman?" And he said, "Oh, Jesus Christ, no. Good Lord, I hope you didn't waste any of your time on that." Which I had the printed pitch behind my back at the time, and so I just sort of very, very slowly, quietly started tearing it up. Because that's the thing. We have ideas about what we would want to do with these well-known characters, but we don't own these well-known characters. We're not the editorial staff who's already decided 8 months ago what they're going to do with these characters, and they're not telling any of the creators what they've already decided to do with these characters. And pitching a story, it's like trying to shoot a basket in the dark, except the basket's moving. So like I can say, sure, I would love to write Wolverine. I would love to write a story where Wolverine gets transported to an alien world and he explores the world. That would be a lot of fun. I'd love it. It would be great. Is it ever going to happen? Probably not. Would I be better off coming up with other stuff that I can make happen? As far as I'm concerned, yes.
Okay. So my first goal is I do get to, shameless plugging here, I do get to publish my own stuff. So my personal super favorite character to write is my own Blackjack. And so I hear you, Dan, right there. As long as I have control over that, it will happen. 2 things. One, of the characters that exist right now, which I have no ownership of on either level, it's Batman and Black Panther. And I've had the opportunity to write both. And if someone were to come to me, in a dream and say that you can definitely have a run for a year on either one of these characters, which one would you go for? I would find a way to, do a crossover. So that would take care of my problem there. Because I love both of them, and I definitely would like to be able to do more material. But what I find funny is what Susan said. When you said it, it's like suddenly I was zapped back in time, and I remembered something that I had always wanted to do, and I'd forgotten about until just now. There was one of the DC characters or a team that used to exist in the 60s, 70s that I really enjoyed. It's one of the things I miss about comics is the different genres that used to exist, right? Because we're now so spandex happy. Challengers of the Unknown.
Yeah.
I wanted, and I didn't want that modern version that they did of them with the funky suits. I wanted these four people who, and 5 if you add the girl, who were living on borrowed time, luck, whatever it was. And so they were human. They got into dangerous situations. It was about skill and brains and guts to get out of it or deal with it, and extraordinary circumstances. And that kind of story, I would love to do that. I would love to revitalize that And I could even come at it from a slightly pseudo-educational standpoint, because oceanography is something I'm a little bit fascinated with, but what we're doing to the planet anyway is so foul that, hey, I could definitely come up with some marine biology stories and things like that that would deal with that, and it would be great. So yes, give me a year to bring back the challenges of the unknown, soup them up, get them a little bit more into a bit more of the psyche of today, but still pretty much the original team with some gender shifting slightly. But that would be my goal.
I'll be reading that.
Yeah, and we'll be talking Shadow too.
Does anybody want to add anything on this topic, or really any other? No?
Yeah, well,
yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Well, I was just going to say that, we sit here as people who enjoy and have enjoyed comics in their more gentler times, and then through some of their chaotic moments. And when we look forward into the future, we are looking at least for me, I feel like we're looking at a whirlwind of possibilities, some of them not so promising. And I'm just sort of curious where your heads are about this, because now that big conglomerates own everything now, it's Disney that owns Marvel, it's Warner that owns DC, and National or DC is no longer in New York. It's gone. It's an IP office in California that's been gutted to a certain degree. So I'm just, where do you see comics, not just the big 2 or 3, but where do you see comics going forward? Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I see myself as someone who still wants to get hired by some of these big conglomerates. So I am very careful not to say anything that sounds overly critical unless they've made an active misstep. And maybe that sounds a little sell-outy, but I like selling out. I enjoy food and I like having power. So selling out is fun. But
I don't think, I'm saying, I didn't mean to make it sound like I was coming down on them. I'm just saying that's the new reality.
Yeah, it is very narrow to view what happens with the big media conglomerates as comics. David Willis has his entire Walkie-verse. He's running Dumbing of Age. He makes a living off a webcomic. Corey Bingaman, who does Skin Deep. It's a beautiful, deep, epic fantasy comic. You've got everything coming out of Hiveworks. You've got Shannon Garrity and Jeffrey Wells over on Skin Horse. You've even got Phil and Kaya Folio, who went independent with Girl Genius several years ago and have been doing really well since then. So you can make a living doing comics outside of the big houses. Those are almost entirely artist-writer hybrids, people that can do both sides of the equation. And I think it's easier to be fully independent in comics if you can make your own art.
Mm-hmm.
But the future of comics is really bright. You mentioned manga earlier, and I tend to bristle a little when people bring manga into the context of American comics, because it's like bringing isekai into the matter of portal fantasy. You're conflating 2 non-identical genres into the same place. But in the case of both American comics and manga, it's a medium rather than a genre. And comics contracted way too much until the medium and the genre became almost synonymous with capes. And now we're starting to see that spread out again. And that's a wonderful thing. That's going to help us thrive as an ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree with that. I too would love to be hired by Marvel, because I'm old enough to remember, the gimmick was you went to New York and you knocked on doors and you tried to get an editor to hire you. I would love to do that. I haven't written comics in a long time for anybody. But I still would. But yeah, the technology, digital technology has made a revolution in comics, sort of underneath the canopy of the big 2 and their subsidiaries, Dark Horse and so forth, Image. But there is, as Sean had said, there's a revolution of self-published, self-created, excellent quality comics out there now, which is amazing. That you didn't have even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, because the technology to do it wasn't there. Sort of like self-publishing in books.
It was called Vanity Press then.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I still write comics. I do the side story. Well, they call them manga stuff. It's manga format. The side story, sequential art pieces based on Aaron Hunter's Warriors, YA novels. All of the manga stuff associated with that, I do. I did this thing through Learner Books.
Learner.
Dogs through Kansas just came out recently. And comics is, it's something that's near and dear to my heart, but I am not a writer-artist hybrid. I am a writer. That is where my talent begins and ends. And for me, I'm not as fast as Seanan, but I'm fairly fast, and I can write a novel in a couple of months, whereas a comic book project typically takes years to get set up and come out. There are many different moving pieces, each of which represents an opportunity for something to go wrong. And so for the stuff that I am going to create, all of that is going to be prose from now on. I created Mega Dogs, but 99% of what I create is going to be prose from now on, because I can make it happen. I have a good relationship with several publishers. I can put a proposal together and get the contract and write the book and have it come out. And I just that's a better way to do it for me. Just me personally, not slagging off on anybody or anything. Just that's my personal preference.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. And to finish, I'd like to ask everybody to tell us where people can find you on the web, find information about your work. And if there is a project you would specifically like to draw attention to, please do that now. And we'll start with Susan and Clay.
I don't remember our website.
You can find us at clayandsusangriffith.com. You can find us on Facebook, both as Clay and Susan separately, or as Clay and Susan together as our writing pros. We're on Twitter. I can't remember what our Twitter handle is.
At Clay and Susan?
There you go. It's the usual way to find us. Other than that, we're working steadily on both some joint projects and some individual projects. Clay's can talk about his. I'm working on oh my God, I'm blanking, a Western with some magics and some weird West stuff. And we're also still working on our 1930 fantasy set in New York City in the nightclub era. And, so you got anything?
No, I don't really have anything that's
right.
pitchable worth pitching. If you want. So.
And that's
Dan?
Oh, I thought Nancy wanted
No,
to
I'd ask Seanan if she wanted to weigh in.
Oh, you didn't come through at all.
Sorry.
At least on my end. No, it's all right. So if you can spell my name, you can find me. I am the only Seanan McGuire in the world right now who is not a sheep farmer in Ireland. I have several cousins named Seanan who are all farming sheep in Ireland. It's kind of what we do, except for me, because, I'm not there. I am up for 3 Hugo Awards this year. I'm up for Best Series for the October Day books. I'm up for Best Novella for Come Tumbling Down. And I'm up for Best Graphic Story for the 2nd volume of Spider-Gwen Ghost Spider. It's called Dog Days. It is one of my favorite things I've done. It's also the only Cape comic or Big 2 comic on the ballot this year. And it's the first nomination for both of my artists. It would be amazing if we could win. I'm mostly on Twitter as @Seanan McGuire, and there are lots and lots of cute cat pictures there. So if you want to see some really cute cats, you should come by my Twitter.
Dan?
You can find me at my website, www.danjolley.com, and that's Jolley with an E before the Y. I'm terrible at social media. I'm mainly on Facebook, and there's more Dan Jolleys out there than you would think. There's some poor guy in the UK that I keep getting his work email. I'm not sure how that happened. I've taken many steps to try to fix it, and it's not working yet. Anyway, that's Facebook, and I think I'm like dan.jolly1 is how you find me on there. The next thing that I've got going on, it's coming out in October from Falstaff Books. I'm really excited about. It's a hybrid high fantasy detective story. It's the first time I've written anything fantasy-like. I've done lots of sci-fi, but not any fantasy. And so it's a fantasy detective story called The Rune Master Homicide. And that's debuting at Multiverse Con in Atlanta in October.
Which is such a good convention.
I've never been. This is my first time. I'm really excited.
Yeah, this is only their second year. I was their guest of honor for their first year. It was absolutely fantastic. Beautiful convention. But be careful, they had bed bugs in the hotel last time.
Oh. Yeah.
Good to be forewarned.
Okay.
Alex, you want to close that out for us?
Certainly. So website-wise, simmonshereandnow.com is one. And another website is blackjackadventures.com, so that gives you two. And then oddly situation with Instagram. I'm definitely Blackjack Adventures on Instagram, but I'm also my personal, or not personal, but my professional writer's Instagram is Simmons lower score or underscore Alexander, because there were too many Alexander Simmonses in the world, including an Irish one in Europe who had done some terrible things. So I don't understand. I don't know. I'm always a nice guy. So Simmons underscore Alexander on Instagram, Simmons Here and Now on the web, or Blackjack Adventures on the web and on Instagram. And one more thing, 15 years ago, I helped create an initiative called the Kids Comic-Con, which has been for 15 years doing comics for comic book conventions for kids and family here in New York, and we've traveled a bit. So you can also find me at kidscomiccon.com on the web. And project-wise, I'm writing afterwards for paper cuts, omnibus volumes of Asterix. So I get to do some commentary on that. And of course, this past March, so the book is still kind of fresh on the marketplace, is Black Panther, Tales of Wakanda. I am one of 18 writers in this magnificent anthology. It is chock full of some great stuff, not just stories about the Black Panther, but about so many of the other characters and the area itself. It's phenomenal. I'm in a book with Nikki Giovanni, so I mean, you can't go wrong.
Well, thank you, everybody. And you can find me at nancynorthcott.com or here at ConTinual. I'm here a lot. So thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight. And thank you to everyone who's watching. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, you can visit www.heroesonline.com.